This story was sent to me by a listener who signs as Tomas from the north of Argentina. He wrote to me that he has been trying to find an explanation for 3 years and has already given up. What happened to him occurred when he was 40 years old, in a mountain hotel where he stayed for just one night for work. One night was enough. If you have ever had an experience in a place that felt wrong from the very first moment, tell me about it below. Now, this is what Tomas experienced. I am a seller of agricultural machinery. I say this because it is relevant. My job consists of traveling routes, visiting producers, spending nights in hotels in towns that do not appear on most tourist maps. I have been doing this for 20 years. I have slept in places ranging from perfectly comfortable to barely tolerable, and throughout that time, I developed the capacity to adapt to any space without thinking too much about it. I enter, leave my suitcase, take a shower, sleep. The next morning I leave. Hotels are interchangeable rooms, nothing more. That's why what happened to me at the hotel in Cañada Oscura is so difficult for me to assimilate even now, 3 years later, because I am not suggestible. I do not seek these things. I had no reason for my mind to fabricate what I am about to describe. It was a Wednesday in July, a dry winter, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, a clear and dark sky, like those seen only far from the cities. I was heading to a meeting with a big producer in a town that was 3 hours away, and the company's protocol in such cases is to stay the night before to arrive rested for the morning meeting. The GPS took me to Cañada Oscura, which was the closest town to the producer's field. I arrived around 9 at night. The town was small even by my standards, a main avenue with some closed shops, a gas station, a church, and the hotel. The hotel was simply called Hotel del Camino. It was a 2-story building, one of those constructed in the 70s that never quite decided whether to be functional or have character, and in the process it achieved neither. With a facade of exposed bricks, a sign with illuminated plastic letters, and a dirt parking lot in front where there were 3 other vehicles. I entered. The reception was a wooden counter with a lady in her 60s who looked up from the television when the doorbell rang. "Good evening, a room please." She handed me a form to fill out, processed my card, and gave me a key with a plastic keychain that had the number 12 written on it with a marker. "Second floor at the end of the corridor," she said. "Breakfast is from 7 to 9. "Thank you," I said. "Sir," she said as I was turning away. I stopped. "The heating in room 12 takes a while to warm up," he said. "Leave it on since you enter." "Understood," I said. I went up the stairs with the suitcase. The corridor on the second floor was long and narrow, with a carpet of a red that had been intense at some point, and that time had worn down to a dull brown. The walls had that wallpaper from the 80s, with a geometric pattern in colors that must have been modern 4 decades ago. The room doors were made of dark wood with brass numbers. I walked to the end. Room 12 was the last one in the corridor, against the back wall. I opened the door and entered. The room was what I expected. A double bed, a wardrobe, a table with a chair, an old television on a low cabinet, a small bathroom with the shower marked by lime. The cold inside was almost the same as outside. I found the heating thermostat on the wall next to the door and turned it up to the maximum, as the receptionist had instructed me. I left my suitcase, took a shower with water that took too long to heat up, put on my sleepwear, and got into bed. I had a meeting at 9 in the morning. I needed to sleep. The heating started to work slowly, with that pipe sound that old systems make, a metallic and rhythmic tapping that at first seems like it will be annoying, and then the brain incorporates it as background noise and ignores it. I fell asleep before 11. I woke up at 2:40 in the morning. I don't know what woke me up. There wasn't a specific noise that I could identify afterward. I just woke up suddenly, with that particular feeling of alertness that one has when something in the environment changes while sleeping and the brain detects it before consciousness does. The room was dark. The heating was still running, the constant metallic tapping. The temperature had risen enough that the cold was no longer aggressive. I lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting my consciousness finish waking up. I didn't feel anything particularly abnormal, just the state of alertness without a specific object that sometimes comes with a sudden awakening in an unfamiliar place. Then I heard the breathing. It was slow, regular, the rhythm of someone asleep, or someone who wants to seem asleep. and it was coming from the chair in the corner next to the table, about 2 meters from the bed. I got up in bed very slowly, trying not to make any noise, and looked towards the corner. In the darkness I could make out the silhouette of the chair, and on the chair there was something sitting. I couldn't see details. It was too dark for that. But the silhouette was unmistakable, something that occupied the space of the chair, with a volume that corresponded to that of a person sitting, with what seemed to be a head slightly inclined forward, like someone sleeping sitting up. I remained absolutely still. The breathing continued, slow, regular, without variation. I reached out my arm towards the nightstand, searching for the lamp switch. I found it and pressed it. The room was illuminated with the dim light of the nightstand lamp. The chair was empty. I kept looking at it for a time I couldn't measure. The simple wooden chair, with the straight back, completely empty. The table behind, with the glass of water that I had placed there before falling asleep, intact. I listened. Silence, except for the heating. I got up and checked the bathroom. Empty. The closet. Empty. I looked under the bed. Nothing. The room's door was still locked from the inside, the security chain on as I had left it. There was no one. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lamp on and tried to think calmly. It was possible that I had been half asleep and that the darkness and a particular angle of the shadows had created an illusion. It was possible that the breathing I had heard was a sound from the heating or the building that my sleepy brain had interpreted differently. Everything was possible. I lay back down with the lamp on and took a long time to fall asleep again. When I did, I dreamed. In the dream, I was in the same room, but it was different. Older, with different furniture, with wallpaper that was not the same. There was a window where I remembered there being a wall, and through that window, a light came in that did not correspond to any time of day. In the corner chair there was a man sitting. I saw him from behind. He was older, with white hair and the hunched posture of someone who has carried weight for a long time. He wore clothes that were not from this era, that kind of work clothing that men from the countryside wore 50 or 60 years ago. He did not move. In the dream, I approached him with that particular logic of dreams, where one does things that one wouldn't do while awake. I walked until I was right behind him, and he spoke without turning around. "You shouldn't be in this room," he said. The voice was old and dry, like paper that crumbles. "Why?" I asked in the dream. "Because this room is already occupied," he said. I woke up. It was daytime. Light came through the blinds, and the lamp on the bedside table remained on, pale and useless against the morning light. The phone clock read 7:15. I got up, took a shower, got dressed, and went down for breakfast. The lady at the reception also attended to the dining room. There were 2 other people having breakfast at separate tables, men who looked similar to me, travelers or workers passing through. I had coffee and croissants at a table by the window and looked at the main street of the town that was beginning to wake up with the slowness of small places in winter. When the lady came to offer me more coffee, I made the decision to ask her. "A question," I said. "Room 12. Does it have anything particular?" She looked at me. "Particular in what sense?" "In any sense," I said. "Is there anything I should know about that room?" The lady placed the coffee pot on the table with more care than was necessary. "Why do you ask?" "Because I woke up at 3 in the morning thinking there was someone in the room." She didn't respond immediately. She looked towards the other tables, as if checking that the other customers weren't listening. "Did you see anything?" she asked in a lower voice. "A silhouette in the chair. When I turned on the light, there was nothing." The woman nodded slowly, with the expression of someone who is not surprised, but wasn't expecting to have this conversation. "That room has a history," she said. "It's not something we put on the sign, as you can understand." "What kind of history?" She hesitated. "The hotel is 40 years old, but the building is older than that. Before it was a hotel, it was other things. And before that, on the land, there was a house. In that house, in the room that is now 12, a man died a long time ago. Alone, in a chair. He was found days later. Who was he? An old man who lived alone. He had no family here. No one really knows where he came from or how long he had been in the town. The old folks say he was a strange man, who didn't talk to anyone, who went out little. And since then, since the hotel has been operating as such, There have been guests who complain about 12, she said. Not all, not always, but every so often someone comes down in the morning with that face you have now. Why do they keep using that room? She looked at me with something that could have been shame or could have been resignation. Because most of the time nothing happens, he said. And because the hotel has few rooms and we can't afford to leave one empty permanently. I paid for breakfast, went up to get the suitcase, and when I entered the room for the last time to make sure I wasn't leaving anything behind, I paused at the door for a moment and looked at the chair. It was just a wooden chair in the corner of a hotel room. But as I looked at it, I remembered the voice from the dream. That old dry voice. This room is already occupied. I took the suitcase and left. The meeting went well. The producer signed the order I needed, and I returned home that same afternoon by a different route, avoiding Cañada Oscura, even though it added 40 minutes to the trip. I don't know if what I saw in that room was the ghost of the man who died there decades earlier. I don't know if dreams can be visits or if they are just the brain processing what it absorbed during the day. I'm not the kind of person who needs these things to have a label in order to carry them. What I do know is that since that night, when I arrive at a hotel and enter the room, the first thing I do before leaving the suitcase is look at the chair, just to make sure it's empty. So far, it always is. So far, that's all Tomas wanted to share. He told me that he never stayed in that town again and has no plans to do so. I completely understand why. If you've had an experience in a hotel or a transient place that you never quite figured out, I would love to read it in the comments. Those brief stories are sometimes the ones that weigh the most. And if you stayed listening until now, subscribe to keep receiving more testimonies like Tomas's. Good night. We'll hear from you in the next story. A follower of the channel shared with me this experience they lived 2 years ago when they inherited a house in a rural village in Michoacan, Mexico. What they found in the basement and what happened next forced them to sell the property for a fraction of its value and move to another city. If you have inherited properties from deceased relatives and felt that something of theirs or something darker was trapped within those walls, I would love for you to share it below. Now, this is the story of Mateo and the cursed legacy that his grandmother left him without warning. My name is Mateo, and until 2 years ago, I lived a completely normal life in Guadalajara. I worked as an accountant, had a comfortable apartment, and a girlfriend I planned to marry. Everything changed when I received the news that my maternal grandmother, Doña Socorro, had passed away at 93 years old in her house in the village of San Miguel del Monte, in the mountains of Michoacan. I hadn't seen my grandmother in over 10 years. Our family had distanced itself from her after my mother died when I was 15. My grandmother blamed my father for my mother's death, even though it had been cancer, something no one could prevent. The relationship became so toxic that we simply stopped visiting her. The lawyer who handled her will contacted me. I was her only direct heir. She left me her house, her land, and all her belongings. The lawyer mentioned that there was a condition. I had to spend at least 3 nights in the house before deciding whether to sell it or keep it. Your grandmother was very specific about this, the lawyer said over the phone. She said you needed to understand something before deciding. She didn't explain what, just that you had to stay in the house. It seemed strange to me, but I accepted. 3 nights were nothing, and the property was easily worth several million pesos. I could sell it and use the money for a down payment on a house for my girlfriend and me. I drove to San Miguel del Monte on a Friday afternoon. The town was small, perhaps 300 inhabitants, clinging to the slope of a mountain covered with pines and oaks. My grandmother's house was on the outskirts, isolated from the town by a 2-kilometer dirt road. It was an old construction of adobe and stone, 2 stories high, with a red tile roof. The gardens were neglected, overrun with weeds. The windows had closed wooden shutters, giving the house a blind and closed appearance. I used the key that the lawyer had given me to open the front door. The interior smelled musty, of years of solitude and accumulated dust. The furniture was covered with white sheets, like ghosts of a past life. I explored the ground floor. There was a spacious room with a fireplace, an old kitchen with a wood stove, a formal dining room that probably hadn't been used in decades. Everything was frozen in time, as if my grandmother had stopped making changes to the house at some point in the 70s. I went up to the second floor. There were 3 bedrooms. I chose the one that seemed to have been the guest room. I didn't want to sleep in my grandmother's room. The bedroom had a single bed with a mattress that smelled of dampness, a carved wooden wardrobe, and a window that overlooked the dark woods surrounding the property. After settling in, I decided to explore the rest of the house while there was still light. It was then that I found the basement door, hidden behind a heavy pantry in the kitchen. The door was locked with an old padlock, but the key was hanging on a hook right next to it, as if my grandmother wanted it to be found. On the door, carved into the wood, were words in what seemed to be Nahuatl, the indigenous language of the region. I couldn't read them, but something about them made me uncomfortable. I opened the padlock and the door swung inward, revealing stone stairs that descended into darkness. A smell rose from below. Incense, copal, and something organic that I couldn't identify. I used my phone's flashlight to light the way as I went down. The stairs were steep and worn from use. The stone walls were damp, covered in moss in some places. The basement was larger than expected, extending beneath the entire footprint of the house, and what it contained made me stop dead in my tracks. It was not an ordinary basement. It was an altar, a complete ceremonial space dedicated to something that clearly was not the Catholicism that my grandmother publicly professed. In the center, there was a long table covered with a black tablecloth. On it, dozens of candles of different colors, most consumed to mere puddles of wax. There were clay figurines representing figures I did not recognize, some human, others mixing human and animal traits. There were jars filled with herbs, dark liquids, powders of strange colors, and on the back wall, painted directly on the stone, there was a huge mural. It depicted a female figure surrounded by snakes, holding something that looked like a bleeding heart in one hand and a skull in the other. Her eyes were open too wide. Her mouth smiled with too many teeth. Below the mural were books, ancient grimoires, some in Spanish, others in Nahuatl, one in what appeared to be Latin. I leafed through them with trembling hands. They were books of magic, of rituals, of invocations to entities that the church would have considered demonic. My grandmother had been a witch, a practitioner of black magic combining folk Catholicism, pre-Hispanic indigenous traditions, and something darker that I could not fully identify. And in one of the books, I found pages marked with my name, not just my name, but dates, my birth, my mother's death, my college graduation. Every important event in my life was documented along with symbols and annotations in the margins. There was a large envelope on the altar table with my name written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a letter and an object wrapped in black cloth. The letter said, "Mateo, my dear grandson, if you are reading this, it means you have finally found my true chapel, the place where I have worked for over 70 years. I know your father raised you to be skeptical, not to believe in these things, but you need to understand the truth about our family, about your mother, and about the price I have paid to keep you alive. When your mother fell ill with cancer, I did what any desperate mother would do. I sought power beyond what the doctors could offer. I found that power in the ancient traditions of our ancestors, in the pacts that one can make when willing to pay the price. I made a deal with the lords of the mountain, the ancient entities that have inhabited these mountains since before the Spaniards arrived. I offered them sacrifice and service in exchange for healing your mother. But the lords are deceitful. Yes, they cured her cancer technically, but they transferred it, not back to her, but to you. You were supposed to have died from that cancer at 16. When I realized the deception, I made another pact, a darker pact. I offered my own life, artificially extended through rituals, as collateral. As long as I lived and continued the rituals of service, you would live free from the disease. But now I am dead, and the pact needs to be renewed or terminated. The wrapped object is the stone of the covenant. It is the physical anchor of the agreement between our family and the lords. If you destroy it, the covenant will break, and the cancer you were meant to have at 16 will catch up with you. You will die in weeks. If you keep it and learn the rituals in the books I have left, you can continue the covenant. But it comes at a price. The lords demand service, rituals every new moon, specific offerings, and every 5 years, a greater sacrifice. I do not expect you to forgive me for binding you to this without your knowledge, but I do not regret it either. You are my blood, and I would do anything to keep you alive. The choice is now yours. I asked for 3 nights because that is how long it takes the lords to present themselves once the guardian of the covenant has died. They will come for you before dawn on the 3rd day. You must decide before then. With eternal love and infinite apologies, your grandmother Socorro. My hands trembled so much that I almost dropped the letter. I unwrapped the object. It was a stone the size of my fist, black as obsidian but with red veins that seemed to pulse with their own light. It was warm to the touch, and when my fingers touched it, I felt something, a heartbeat, as if the stone were alive. I dropped the stone as if it burned and ran up from the basement. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. My grandmother had been senile in the end, clearly. This was just the fantasies of an old woman who had lost touch with reality. But then I remembered something. When I was 16, just after my mother died, I became seriously ill. The doctors couldn't diagnose what was wrong. High fever, weight loss, unbearable pain. They ran all kinds of tests, including full scans looking for cancer. They found nothing, and after 3 weeks the symptoms simply disappeared. The doctors called it a severe viral infection that had run its course, but they never identified what virus. Could it have been? No, I couldn't afford to believe in this. I spent the first night in the house awake, sitting in the living room with all the lights on, trying to rationalize what I had found. In the morning, I drove to town to talk to people who might have known my grandmother. What I discovered chilled my blood. Everyone in the village knew what my grandmother was. They called her the healer, but the title came with fear, mixed with respect. She had cured diseases, yes, but she had also cursed people. She had performed rituals that people whispered about but never spoke of directly, and everyone mentioned the lords of the mountain. It was a local belief that in the mountains surrounding the village lived ancient entities, neither gods nor demons exactly, but something in between. Entities that had been revered by pre-Hispanic cultures and had never really left. Your grandmother was the only one who could communicate with them, an old man told me in the only cafe in the village. She made pacts on behalf of others. She always warned that there was a price, but desperate people do not heed warnings. What kind of price? I asked. The old man looked at me with tired eyes. It depends on the pact. Sometimes it's continuous service, sometimes it's sacrifice. It's always more than what people expect to pay. I returned home more confused and scared than before. Part of me just wanted to leave, drive back to Guadalajara, forget all of this. But my grandmother's letter obsessed me. What if it was true? What if I really had latent cancer that only the rituals had contained? The second night was worse than the first. I heard things. Movement in the woods around the house. Scratches on the outside walls. And from the basement, I could swear I heard voices singing in that ancient language I didn't understand. At midnight, I forced myself to go down to the basement again. I needed to understand. My grandmother's books were all there. I started reading them using my cell phone to translate the parts in Nahuatl. What I found was a story of generations. My grandmother had not been the first. Our family had been involved with the Lords of the Mountain for at least 5 generations. Each guardian of the pact learned the rituals and passed them on to the next. But my mother had broken the cycle. She had refused to learn the rituals, married my father, and moved far away. And when she fell ill, my grandmother had brought her back to this basement, to this altar, and had renewed the pact by force. The details of what my grandmother had sacrificed over the years were meticulously documented. Animals at first, then more valuable things, years of her own life, precious memories that she literally forgot after offering them, skills that she lost permanently, and every 5 years the greater sacrifice. I found records of 3 of these sacrifices. They did not specify what exactly she had sacrificed, only that after each one, she had been physically ill for weeks and had visibly aged years in days. The last major sacrifice had been 6 years ago. The next would have been due in another year, but my grandmother had died before, passing the responsibility to me. At dawn on the 3rd day, I was exhausted but still awake. I had made a decision. I would destroy the stone, break the pact. If I truly had cancer, I would rather face it with modern medicine than bind myself to serve dark entities for the rest of my life. I took the stone from the altar and carried it outside. I found a large rock and prepared to crush it. But the moment I lifted the stone above my head, I felt something. A sharp pain in my chest, then in my stomach, then spreading throughout my body like liquid fire running through my veins. I fell to the ground, the pack stone rolling out of my hands. The pain was unbearable, as if every cell in my body was being consumed from the inside. And then I saw them, emerging from the forest. 3 figures. They were not completely solid. They were like 3-dimensional shadows, shapes that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. They were vaguely humanoid, but too tall, too thin, with limbs extending in impossible proportions. The grandson of Socorro, one said, her voice resonating directly in my mind. The last of the line. The pact must continue or it must end. Choose now. I don't want this, I managed to say between waves of pain. Then die. Another of the figures replied, the illness that your grandmother contained for 22 years will be unleashed. You will have perhaps 2 weeks before your body completely fails. Oh, said the third figure, accept the pact, learn the rituals, serve as your grandmother served, and you will live a long life with power that few mortals know. The pain intensified. I could feel something growing inside me, cells multiplying out of control exactly like the cancer that had killed my mother. What is the real price? I asked. Continuous service, replied the first figure. Rituals every new moon, offerings of life energy, yours and that of others seeking our favor, and every 5 years you must bring us a soul, someone who willingly agrees to serve in your place for a period. Their service feeds the pact for another 5 years. What happens to those souls? They are transformed. They become part of us, eternal servants in the realm between worlds. It is not death, but it is not life as you know it either. I saw my future unfolding before me in 2 paths. In one, I rejected this and died painfully within weeks. In the other, I accepted and became what my grandmother had been, a witch in service of forces I did not fully understand, manipulating the life and death of others to maintain a corrupt pact. And I made the most cowardly and selfish decision of my life. I accept, I whispered. Immediately, the pain disappeared. The cancer that had been growing stopped, reversed, vanished as if it had never existed. I felt stronger, more alive than I had been in years. The figures approached. One of them extended what could be called a hand. I took it and felt energy flowing from them to me. Knowledge. The rituals were implanted in my mind like memories I had always had. The pact is renewed, they said in unison. You have 5 years until the first major sacrifice. Use that time wisely. Learn the rituals well. And remember, trying to break the pact after accepting it results in consequences worse than mere death. They faded back into the forest, leaving me alone in my grandmother's garden at dawn. That was 2 years ago. I have performed the rituals every new moon. I have used the knowledge I inherited to heal some, to curse others who have offended me. I permanently moved to my grandmother's house away from my previous life in Guadalajara. My girlfriend broke up with me when I couldn't explain why I suddenly needed to live in a remote mountain village. I left my job as an accountant. Now I am the healer of the village, just as my grandmother was the healer. And in 3 more years, I will have to make my first major sacrifice. I will have to find someone willing to accept an offer that sounds too good to be true, who will voluntarily sign their soul to serve the lords of the mountain. I have already started identifying potential candidates. Desperate people, sick people, people who believe they have nothing to lose. It's easier than you would think. Desperation makes people accept terms they would never consider under normal circumstances. I hate myself for what I have become, but I would hate myself more for being dead. So I carry on. I perform the rituals. I learn more from my grandmother's books. And I prepare for the day when I will have to look someone in the eyes and convince them to give up their soul to extend my own cursed pact. Sometimes I wonder if my grandmother struggled with the same guilt, if each of the guardians of the pact before me felt this same weight. The books do not say. They only document the rituals, the sacrifices, the dates. Nothing about how they felt doing it. The house is now truly mine. I partially remodeled it, updating the kitchen and bathrooms. But the basement remains exactly as my grandmother left it. It is my chapel now, the place where I kneel before the mural of the dark goddess and sing in ancient tongues under the new moon. And every night when the forest darkens and I hear movement among the trees, I know that the lords of the mountain are watching, ensuring that I fulfill my part of the pact, waiting for the next sacrifice I owe them. 3 more years. Just 3 years before I have to completely destroy the life and soul of another person to save my own. And I will. Because I am a coward. Because I value my life more than my morality. Because once you accept the pact, there is no true way out except forward, deeper into the darkness. My grandmother knew this. That's why she left me the letter, the stone, the house. She wasn't giving me a real choice. She was making sure that the family pact continued, that another generation served the lords of the mountain. And it worked. I am the guardian of the pact now. And in some future, if I have children, one of them will inherit this basement, these books, this pulsating stone that beats like a dark heart. The cycle continues, as it has continued for 5 generations. As it will continue as long as there is someone of our blood willing to sacrifice their humanity for a few more years of life. That is the true price of the pact, not just the rituals or the occasional sacrifices. It is what makes you yourself, how it transforms you from a person into a tool, from human into a conduit for forces that should not be served. My grandmother lived to 93. If I continue the pact faithfully, I might too. Decades more of artificially extended life, bought with the souls of others. Is it worth it? Ask me in 3 years, after the first major sacrifice. Ask me if I can still look at myself in the mirror after condemning someone to eternal servitude. But I probably already know the answer. Because if my grandmother could do it 5 times and the guardians before her did it dozens of times more, then I can too. Because in the end, we are all weaker than we think. We are all capable of greater darkness than we admit. And all of us, when we face our own mortality, discover exactly how much we are willing to sacrifice of ourselves and others to keep living one more day. That was Mateo's testimony. He contacted me a month ago, and by the date, I estimate he has about a year left before his first major sacrifice. I don't know if he will actually do it or if he will find another way out. If you have ever found yourself caught in an impossible decision where all the options seem terrible, share it in the comments. Sometimes the choices we make in moments of fear define us more than we would like to admit. Rest in peace, and see you in the next story. I want to share the testimony of a listener who signs as Rodrigo from Peru. He wrote to me that this happened to him when he was 19 years old, during a vacation in the town where his mother was born. He told me that for years he tried to forget it, and that writing it down was the first time he put it into complete words. If you have something similar that you have been carrying alone, you know that there is space here to share it. This is what Rodrigo experienced the summer he met the man on the road. He was 19 years old, and was one of those people who are not afraid of anything because they have not yet seen enough. I say this without pride. It is simply what he was. He was studying his first year of engineering, living in Lima, and had that unfounded confidence that comes from not having yet encountered something that takes it away. My friends told me I was reckless. My mother told me I was imprudent. I thought both of them were wrong. That summer I went to spend 3 weeks in Huayco Viejo, which is what I will call the town where my mother was born, and where relatives still lived whom I barely knew, because the move to Lima had happened when she was very young, and the ties to that place had been maintained, but from a distance. It was my mother who suggested the trip to me. She said she wanted me to know where the family came from, that the relatives were asking about me, that the mountain air would do me good after a year, locked up in the city. I went with the attitude of someone doing a favor. I arrived by bus, a long journey that ended in a small town perched on a hillside over 3,000 meters high. The adobe houses, the dirt streets, the dry cold of the altitude that no city coat is really prepared to face. My Aunt Graciela, my mother's sister, was waiting for me in the square, with that particular warmth of people who live far from the city and who truly welcome visitors without reservations. The first few days were calm. I got used to the cold, to the altitude that initially left me breathless when climbing any slope, to the different schedules, to the silence of the nights that never exists in Lima. I liked the relatives. The food was good. The landscape was one of those that makes you understand why people stay in certain places. It was on the 4th day that I heard about the path through the ravine. I was in my Aunt Graciela's kitchen when 2 neighbors who had come to visit her mentioned that they had seen someone walking along that path the night before, late, when no one should be there. The two women spoke in low voices, with that particular seriousness that people have when describing things that truly concern them. "What path is that?" I asked. The two women looked at me. My Aunt Graciela looked at me too. "The one that goes down through the ravine towards the river," my aunt said. "But you have no business being there." "Why?" "Because at night, that path is not for walking," said one of the neighbors, a lady named Doña Carmen, who had the permanent expression of someone who has seen too many bad things and would prefer not to see any more. "What's wrong with it?" Doña Carmen looked at me with that patience that older people have when they explain something to a young person they know won't fully understand. "There's a man who walks that path at night," she said. "For many years now. No one knows exactly how long. The old folks in the village know him. His parents knew him. He has always been there." "A man? A real man?" "That's what it seems," said Doña Carmen. "Until you get closer." I asked her what she meant by that. My Aunt Graciela placed a cup of tea in front of me with more force than necessary. "Rodrigo," she said, "there are things in this town that belong to this town and that people from outside don't understand. Not because they are silly, but because they haven't grown up with them. I ask you to listen and not to go to the ravine road at night." I changed the subject, but I kept the information. That night, lying in the room that had been assigned to me, with the cold from the mountains seeping through the window and the complete silence of the sleeping town, I thought about the man on the road, in that way that warnings that are not well explained settle in the mind of someone 19 years old, who has not yet learned that there are warnings that deserve to be obeyed, without fully understanding why. The next day I asked my cousin Sebastian, who was my age and had grown up in the town, about the ravine road. Sebastian was different from me, quieter, more careful, with that particular relationship with the environment that people who grew up in places where nature is close have, and where ancient stories are part of the landscape as much as the hills. "Did they tell you about the walker?" he said. "Your mom's neighbors. Have you seen him?" Sebastian looked at me. "Once," he said. "When I was about 15, I went with some friends to the path at night, trying to be brave. We saw him from afar. And we ran away," he said, without any drama, as if that were the only reasonable answer. "We didn't go back." "What exactly did you see?" Sebastian took a while to respond. "A man walking along the path, in the direction of the river. From behind. The thing is, the path in that stretch goes straight, without curves, and we were looking at him from above, from where the path bends. We watched for a while. The man was walking. He kept walking, and he wasn't getting any closer." "Did he not advance?" "He walked and walked but did not get anywhere, as if the path beneath him was moving backward." Sebastian paused. After a while, he stopped walking and stood still, and slowly he turned. Not completely, just enough for us to know that he knew we were there, and at that moment we left. That should have been enough for me. It wasn't. That night, when the house was already asleep and the village was completely silent, I put on my coat, took the small flashlight I carried in my backpack, and went out. The path of the ravine was easy to find. It came out from the southern end of the village and descended the slope following the edge of the ravine, among boulders and low bushes that during the day looked ordinary, and that at night, with only the light of the moon, had elongated shadows and ambiguous shapes of the nocturnal vegetation. I walked for about 20 minutes. The cold was more intense outside the village, with the wind coming down from the hill, smelling of earth and something mineral that I couldn't identify. The flashlight illuminated the path in front of me but created a denser darkness at the edges, that tunnel effect that makes any lateral movement seem more threatening than it is. I didn't see anything during the first 20 minutes. The path was just the path. The ravine to my right was more of a sound than an image, the water flowing below, invisible in the darkness. Then I saw the man. He was ahead on the path, about 50 meters away, with his back to me. He was an average-sized figure, dressed in dark clothing, walking in the direction of the river as Sebastian had described. He walked with the slightly hunched posture of someone older or someone tired. I stopped. I watched him. He was walking. He kept walking. And after a minute, I understood what Sebastian had tried to describe to me. The man was advancing his steps, but the distance between him and me did not change. He remained 50 meters away. 50 meters. even though his legs were moving regularly. I turned off the flashlight. In the darkness, with only the light of the moon, the figure was more visible than I expected. There was something about it that absorbed the light differently from the surroundings, a visual density that made it stand out against the background of the dark path. The man stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind had stopped. The sound of the water from the stream had also disappeared, or I had stopped hearing it. I don't know exactly which of the two things it was. The figure began to turn, slowly, with that deliberate slowness that movements have when they want to be seen. He did not turn completely, just like Sebastian had experienced. He turned enough to show the profile. In the moonlight, the profile was not that of a person. I am not going to describe in detail what I saw, because there are images that describing them too precisely gives them a permanence that I prefer they do not have. What I can say is that the angle of the face did not correspond to the angle of a human face, that the proportions were slightly off in a way that the eye detects before the mind, that there was something in that profile that the brain recognizes as a warning before you can articulate exactly why. I turned around and walked back to the village. I did not run. I know it sounds strange, but at that moment running felt like the wrong option, as if running were a signal, a reaction that something was waiting for. I walked quickly with the flashlight off because turning it on felt worse, using the moonlight to keep me on the path. I did not look back. At some point, when I should have been about 10 minutes from the village, I heard footsteps behind me. Not the steps of someone running to catch up with me, the steps of someone walking at the same pace as me, exactly at the same pace, as if my step were the model and the steps behind were the copy. I kept walking. The steps continued. When I reached the edge of the village, where the first adobe houses marked the end of the road and the beginning of the inhabited space, the steps stopped. I did not stop. I continued to my Aunt Graciela's house, entered, closed the door, and stood in the dark kitchen for a time I did not measure, listening to the silence of the village. There was nothing else that night. The next morning at breakfast, my Aunt Graciela looked at me in a way that told me she knew I had gone out. She didn't say anything at that moment. She waited for Sebastian to go to school and for the other relatives to disperse into their activities, and then she sat down in front of me with a cup of coffee and looked at me with the expression of someone who has something to say and has been waiting for the right moment. "Did you see him?" she said. "Yes." "Did he follow you?" I heard footsteps to the edge of the village. My Aunt Graciela nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something. "What is it?" I asked her. She held the cup with both hands and looked at the coffee before responding. "No one knows for sure," she said. "The old people in the village have different versions. Some say it's someone who died on that road a long time ago and hasn't been able to leave. Others say it was never a person, that it's something that has always been in that ravine, something that existed before the village. There are those who say that in earlier times, the people here had dealings with what lives in certain places, that in exchange for things they gave something, and that what you see on that road is the reminder of one of those dealings." "What kind of dealings?" "The kind that it's better not to know too much about," my aunt said. "What everyone here does know is that there are rules. Not going to the road at night is the main one. As long as no one seeks it out, nothing happens. The problem is when someone seeks it out." "What happens when someone seeks it out?" My aunt looked directly at me. "It depends on how close you get," she said, "and whether it recognizes you." "What does it mean for it to recognize you?" "It means that from that moment on, he knows who you are," he said. "That you don't have to go down the path for him to know where you are." The cold I felt at that moment was not from the weather. "What do I do now?" My aunt got up and went to the kitchen cupboard. She took something from a high shelf, a small bundle of plants tied with red thread, the kind I had seen hanging in some houses in the village, without asking what they were for. He placed it on the table in front of me. "You take it with you," he said. "Don't leave it in a drawer or in your backpack. On your body, close. And while you're here, don't go out at night alone." "What about when I go to Lima?" My aunt looked at me with an expression that mixed worry and something like resignation. "In Lima, there is distance," she said. "Distance helps, but it's not a guarantee. I spent the rest of the vacation in the village without going out at night. I sewed the bundle of plants inside the lining of my coat, as my aunt had instructed me. I didn't see the man on the road again, but 3 nights before I left, between sleep and wakefulness, in that state where the mind is half asleep and half aware, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window, footsteps that walked without going anywhere, at the same rhythm as those on the road. I stayed still with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling until it stopped. I don't know how long it took. When dawn broke, I went out to look at the ground outside the window. There were no footprints. I returned to Lima at the end of the 3 weeks. I kept a bundle of plants in the drawer of the nightstand, not in the lining of the coat as my aunt had told me, because in Lima, it seemed excessive to me, too great a concession to something that I wanted to convince myself was not completely real. That night I dreamed of the path of the ravine, of the figure with its back turned that did not move forward, of the profile that slowly turned under the moonlight. The next morning I took the bundle out of the drawer and tucked it into my pants pocket. I still carry it. Not in the pocket anymore though, because after 2 years it fell apart. My Aunt Graciela sent me another one by mail, without me asking for it, with a brief note that said, "I know the previous one no longer works. Take care. I haven't dreamed of the path again since I got the new one. Or at least I don't remember dreaming of it, which is not exactly the same." So far, this is Rodrigo's testimony. He told me when he sent it that he doesn't know if what he saw that night was what the old folks in the village describe or something different, and that he has stopped needing to know. I think that's wisdom. If you've ever visited a place where the local rules made more sense than you wanted to admit, tell me about it in the comments. And if this story kept you company while you rested, subscribe to keep hearing more each week. Good night. We'll talk again next time. Someone who prefers to remain anonymous sent me this experience a few days ago. They work as a paramedic on night shifts, and what they witnessed during an emergency call at an abandoned house has kept them awake since then. If you work in emergency services and have seen something you can't explain, I would really like you to share it in the comments. Now this is the story of a night that forever changed the way this paramedic views their job. I can't give my real name for reasons that will become clear. I have been working as a paramedic in a medium-sized city in Colombia for 8 years. I have seen all kinds of emergencies: car accidents, heart attacks, stab wounds, overdoses. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I was completely wrong. What I am about to tell happened 3 months ago during a Friday night shift. It was 2:30 in the morning when we received the call. A woman's voice, hysterical, screaming that her son was dying, that he needed help immediately. She gave us an address on the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood I vaguely knew as an old residential area. Large houses of well-off families that had moved in decades ago. My partner that night was Javier, a guy with 20 years of experience who had literally seen it all. We got into the ambulance and headed to the address while the dispatcher tried to get more information from the call. But the line had cut off after giving the address, and when they tried to call the number back, no one answered. "Probably a child with a high fever," Javier commented as he drove through the empty streets. "First-time parents always panic. We arrive, give him something to bring down the temperature, and that's it." We arrived at the address in 15 minutes. The house was at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by tall trees that blocked the light from the street lamps. It was an old 2-story building, Spanish colonial style, with white walls stained by moisture and a completely neglected garden. All the windows were dark. "Are you sure this is the place?" I asked as we got out of the ambulance with our equipment. Javier checked the address on his phone. "It's here, number 247. We approached the front door. I rang the doorbell, but it didn't work. I knocked hard on the door. "Emergency medical services. Please open up." There was no response. I tried turning the doorknob, and to my surprise, it was open. The door creaked open slowly with a prolonged squeak that made my skin crawl. "I don't like this," I murmured. "Me neither," Javier agreed. "But we have an emergency call for a sick child. We can't just leave." We entered with our flashlights on. The interior smelled of dampness, mold, and something sweeter that I couldn't identify. The beam of my flashlight revealed a spacious foyer with furniture covered in dusty white sheets. The walls had damp marks, and the wallpaper was peeling off in long strips. "Hello?" I called. "We are paramedics. Is anyone here?" A sound came from the second floor. Footsteps, slow, dragging, and then a woman's voice, weak and trembling. "Upstairs, please, my son." Javier and I exchanged glances. Something about this felt deeply wrong, but we had a duty to investigate. We carefully climbed the stairs, testing each step before putting our full weight down. The wood creaked ominously. On the second floor there was a long hallway with several doors. One of them, at the end of the hallway, was ajar. A pale light emanated from within, flickering as if it were from candles. We approached cautiously. I pushed the door, and what I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. The room was illuminated with dozens of black candles arranged in a circle. In the center of the circle, on the wooden floor, lay a child of perhaps 8 years. He was completely still, with his eyes closed, dressed in white clothing that looked old-fashioned. His skin was pale, almost gray. Next to the child, kneeling, was a middle-aged woman with long black hair loose over her shoulders. She wore a dark dress and had her hands extended over the child in what seemed to be some kind of ritual. "Ma'am, we are paramedics," I said, quickly approaching. "Please step aside. We need to examine the child." The woman did not move. She didn't even look up. She continued murmuring something softly, words I couldn't understand. Javier moved to the other side of the circle. "Ma'am, we need you to step aside now. Your son needs medical attention." When the woman finally lifted her head to look at us, I felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes were completely black with no visible white, and when he spoke, his voice sounded strange, as if several people were speaking at the same time. "They can't stop it. It's already done. The pact is sealed." "What pact?" I asked, but Javier was already crossing the circle of candles to reach the boy. The moment Javier stepped inside the circle, all the candles went out simultaneously. Darkness fell over the room like a heavy blanket. My flashlight flickered and went out. Javier's did too. "What the hell?" I heard Javier curse in the darkness. I took out my phone to use its light, but the screen was completely black even though it had been fully charged moments before. In that absolute darkness, I heard the woman laugh. It wasn't normal laughter. It was high-pitched, hysterical, and definitely not coming from a single throat. Then the candles reignited on their own, all at once with flames burning twice as high as before, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The woman was no longer kneeling. She was standing, and there was something deeply wrong with the way her body moved, as if her joints weren't functioning properly. She turned towards us, and I saw that her skin had taken on a sickly grayish hue. Black smoke was coming from her open mouth. "He promised me power," she said with that multiple voice. "Power over life and death. All I asked for was the soul of my son. A fair exchange." "Ma'am, you're delirious." I tried to use my calmest tone, even though my heart was racing wildly. "He needs psychiatric help. We're going to take the child and then we'll talk about getting him help too." Javier was already with the child, checking his vital signs. "He has no pulse," he said urgently. "And he's cold, very cold. We need to start CPR now." But when Javier tried to move the child out of the circle, something stopped him. It was as if there was an invisible barrier. The child's body simply wouldn't move beyond the edge of the circle of candles, as if it were bound by invisible strings. "He's trapped," the woman murmured, smiling with a grotesque expression. "His soul is no longer in his body. It's in the hands of my master, and soon I too will be free from this mortal flesh, free to serve in the realm of shadows." At that moment, the child's body convulsed. His eyes snapped open, but they were not the eyes of a child. They were black like the woman's, empty of everything except darkness. His mouth opened, and from it came a voice that was not childish but deep and resonant. "More souls," said the boy who was no longer a boy. "We bring more souls. The witnesses are welcome. Join the service." Javier stepped back, his professional training finally overcome by primal terror. "We need to get out of here, now." But when we turned toward the door, it slammed shut. I tried to open it, but it was sealed, as if it had fused with the frame. The windows too, although there was nothing visible blocking them. The room temperature had dropped drastically. I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. The candles burned brighter, but their light gave no warmth, only a ghostly illumination that made everything look surreal. The woman began to walk in circles around the child, singing in a language I had never heard. Her voice blended with the voice coming from the child's body, creating a discordant harmony that hurt my ears. On the walls, the shadows began to move in ways that did not correspond with the candlelight. They stretched, twisted, taking shapes that vaguely resembled humans, but were completely wrong. And in those shadows, I could swear I saw faces, dozens of them, all silently screaming. "This is a demonic possession," Javier whispered, his voice trembling. "Either we're having a collective hallucination from carbon monoxide or something worse." "I am a paramedic, not a priest," I replied, trying to maintain some semblance of rationality. "But whatever this is, We need to get out. I tried to break the window with a chair, but the glass wouldn't shatter. It was like hitting solid steel. Javier tried to break down the door, but it was equally futile. The woman's chant grew louder, more frantic. The child's body began to slowly levitate off the ground, rising to hover 1/2 meter in the air, arms outstretched, as if crucified in midair. And then, something began to materialize in the room. At first, it was just a distortion in the air, like heat rising from asphalt. But gradually, it solidified into a shape that my mind struggled to process. It was vaguely humanoid, at least 2.5 meters tall, but its skin was like cracked black coal with red light shining from the fissures. He had twisted horns protruding from his head, and his eyes burned with sickly yellow fire. "The master has arrived," the woman said, kneeling. "I have fulfilled my part of the pact. My son belongs to you. Now give me what you promised." The creature spoke, and its voice resonated not only in the room but inside my head, vibrating in my bones. "The child is mine. But you still have use in this plane. I cannot free you yet." The woman let out a scream of frustration and rage. You promised you would take me with you, that you would make me immortal in your service." "And I will," the creature replied, "but not yet. First, you must bring me more souls. These two will do." It pointed at Javier and me. It was at that moment that Javier did something unexpected. He pulled a small crucifix from his pocket, something I didn't know he had, and held it in front of him with a trembling hand. "In the name of Christ, I command you to leave," he said, his voice gaining strength. "You have no power over us." The creature laughed, a sound like stones being crushed. "A symbol? Is that all? Symbols only have the power you give them. And your faith?" It leaned toward Javier, sniffing. "Your faith is weak, doctor, filled with doubts. You don't scare me." But as the creature spoke, I noticed something. When Javier had crossed the circle of candles, he had broken the pattern. One of the candles had tipped over, extinguishing itself. The circle was no longer complete. "Javier," I whispered, "the circle, it's broken. The ritual is not complete." Javier's eyes widened with understanding. Without thinking twice, he kicked over another candle, then another. The circle broke at multiple points. The creature roared with fury. "No, the ceiling!" The floating body of the child fell to the ground with a dull thud. The woman screamed, lunging towards us with her hands outstretched like claws. But when she reached the edge of where the circle had been, she stopped abruptly, as if she had hit an invisible wall. The circle contained her too, I realized. She couldn't leave while the ritual was not complete. The creature was fading, its solid form becoming translucent. "This is not over," it promised in a fading voice. "I have been summoned. Now I know where this place is. I will return. And when I do, all the souls here will be mine." With a final flash of red light, the creature completely disappeared. The temperature in the room began to normalize. The door, which had been sealed, swung open abruptly. The woman fell to the floor, sobbing. Her eyes had returned to normal, no longer black but common brown. She looked confused, disoriented. What happened?" she murmured. "Where is my son? Where is Miguel?" Javier cautiously approached the child. He checked his pulse, his breathing. "He's alive," he said with evident surprise. "Weak, but alive. He has a pulse and is breathing." We loaded the child onto a stretcher and helped the woman walk. She was in shock, seeming to remember nothing of the ritual or the creature. She kept asking what had happened, why she was in that abandoned house, how she had gotten there. When we left the house, the cool night air had never felt so welcome. We loaded both the woman and the child into the ambulance. During the ride to the hospital, the child briefly regained consciousness. He looked at me with clear, normal, childlike eyes. "I was in a dark place," he whispered. "There was something there that wanted to stay with me. But you took me out. Thank you." At the hospital, both the child and the woman were admitted for observation. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with them except dehydration and low blood sugar levels. The psychiatric evaluation determined that the woman had experienced some type of psychotic episode, possibly drug-induced, although the blood tests came back clean. The official story was that a woman with mental health issues had taken her child to an abandoned house during a psychotic episode, and that we had found and rescued them. Simple, neat, rational, but Javier and I knew the truth. We had seen something that had no rational explanation, something ancient and malevolent that existed on the fringes of reality, waiting to be invoked by those desperate or crazy enough to try. We reported the incident as we experienced it to the on-duty coordinator that night, but they looked at us as if we were delirious. They conducted toxicology tests to ensure we had not been under the influence of substances. The tests came back clean. Work stress was the official diagnosis. Shared hallucination induced by exhaustion and the unsettling atmosphere of the abandoned house. They gave us a week of mandatory rest and recommended sessions with the department's psychologist. But I know what I saw. Javier does too. We have talked about it privately, away from official ears. We both saw the same thing. We both felt the same thing. And we both know that what we encountered that night was real. I have researched the house since then. It turns out it has a dark history. It was owned by a wealthy family in the 60s. The patriarch, a man named Augusto Restrepo, was obsessed with the occult. He performed rituals in that house, invoked entities, sought power over death. In 1968, the entire family died under mysterious circumstances. The bodies were found in that same room on the second floor, arranged in a circle with black candles around. The investigation concluded that it was a murder-suicide, but it was never determined what motivated Augusto to kill his entire family and then himself. The house has been abandoned since then. Several subsequent owners tried to live there, but all reported strange phenomena and quickly moved out. Eventually, it was completely abandoned. I don't know how that woman and her son ended up there that night. When she regained lucidity, she didn't remember going to that house. Her last clear memory was being in her apartment, reading a story to her son before bed. Then, a void. And after that, waking up in the ambulance with us. The child doesn't remember much either. Just fragments of dark dreams, whispering voices, and a feeling of intense cold. Javier carries the crucifix with him all the time now. He wasn't particularly religious before, but something about that experience changed his perspective. He goes to Mass every Sunday, something he had never done before. I have started to research more about the occult, not because I want to practice it, but because I want to understand. I want to know what we saw, what kind of entity it was, and above all, I want to know if what it said is true, that it would return. Because that is the part that keeps me awake at night. The creature said it had been summoned, that it now knew where that place was, and that it would come back. When? And for what purpose? I have driven down that street several times since then, always during the day, never alone. The house is still there, abandoned, dark. Sometimes I swear I see movement in the windows of the second floor, shadows that shouldn't be there in an empty house. The city has condemned the property now. There are plans to finally demolish it, after decades of abandonment. Part of me hopes that this will help, that destroying the physical structure will also destroy any portal or connection that exists there. But another part of me, the part that saw what I saw, knows it won't be that simple. What Augusto Restrepo invoked in the 60s, what that woman touched again 3 months ago, is not tied to bricks and wood. It is something more fundamental, more ancient. It exists in the spaces between light and darkness, waiting to be called by those who seek power, knowledge, or escape from their mortality. And there will always be desperate people, arrogant people, or simply curious people who cross the lines that should not be crossed. I continue to work as a paramedic. It's the only thing I know how to do, the only thing I'm good at. But now I carry protection with me, blessed salt in small packets, holy water in a bottle, and yes, my own crucifix. Maybe they are of no use. Maybe Javier's faith was what really made the difference that night. But they make me feel slightly safer on night calls. Because now I know that not all emergencies we respond to are medical. Some are spiritual. Some are battles in a war that most people don't know is being fought, between forces that existed long before us and will continue to exist long after. And sometimes, in the normal course of our work, we stumble upon those battles, and we have to decide in that moment whether to flee or to face. That night, Javier and I faced, and we survived. But I don't know if we will be so lucky next time, because I feel, on some deep level, that there will be a next time. That creature, that demon, or whatever it was, saw us. It knows us, and the last words it said will resonate in my mind for the rest of my life. I will return, and when I do, all the souls here will be mine. I don't know when that moment will be, but I will be ready, or at least, as ready as a simple paramedic can be against forces that defy all logic and reason. That's all this paramedic wanted to share. He told me that writing this was almost cathartic, a way to process the trauma of that night. The house was demolished last month, but he still has nightmares about what he saw. If you work in emergency services and have encountered something inexplicable, I would love to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes those who respond to calls for help find more than they expected. Sleep well tonight. A few days ago, I received a message from a listener who signs as Daniel from Guatemala. He wrote to me that what he is going to tell happened to him when he was 47 years old. During a week he spent alone in a cabin in the mountains. He told me that he never believed in anything supernatural until that week, and that now he can no longer say the same. If you have something similar saved, you know where to leave it. This is what Daniel experienced the night something knocked on his door. I am an emergency doctor. 12 years working in emergencies teach you to distinguish what matters from what doesn't, to make quick decisions with incomplete information, and above all, not to let panic take over when everything seems to indicate that panic would be the reasonable response. What I learned at work has saved me many times in everyday life, but there are things for which that training is of no use. It all started because I needed to rest. 12 years in the emergency room leave a fatigue that cannot be cured with a long weekend. It is a fatigue that accumulates in layers, like sediment, until one day you look in the mirror and see someone who functions properly, but has been functioning for a long time without really being there. My boss suggested I take a week off. My body had been asking me for the same thing for months. A colleague lent me his cabin in the mountains of Guatemala. A small, cozy construction, at almost 2,000 meters high, surrounded by pines and with no close neighbors. No cell signal, with Wi-Fi only via satellite that worked intermittently. The idea was to completely disconnect. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon. The cabin was exactly what I needed. A small living room with a fireplace, a functional kitchen, a bedroom with a bed that had a thick mattress and wool blankets. Outside, the pine forest that smelled of resin and cold earth, and the silence that the mountains have when one arrives from the city and has not yet learned to listen to it as silence and hears it as absence. I settled in, lit the fireplace, warmed up some broth I had brought in a thermos, and fell asleep before 9 at night. The first 2 days were filled with sleep and stillness. I got up late, walked around the cabin, read, ate leisurely, and went to bed early. My body gradually released that accumulated tension, like when one loosens a knot that has been very tight, and the fingers realize they were exerting force without noticing. It was on the third day that I noticed the boy. I was walking along the path that surrounded the cabin, about 200 meters from the building, when I saw him among the trees. He was a small figure, about the height of an 8 or 10-year-old child, standing between two pines about 30 meters from where I was. He was wearing dark clothing that was not suitable for the weather, without a coat despite the cold, and he was looking at me. I stopped. I waved my hand in greeting. The figure did not respond. He remained motionless, looking at me. I walked a few steps in his direction. When I reached the spot where he had been, there was no one. Just the pines and the ground covered with needles and the silence of the forest. I searched with my eyes in all directions. There was no child. There was no figure. I returned to the cabin, not quite understanding what I had seen. The eye deceives in the forest. Shadows create shapes. The contrast between the light filtering through the trees and the shaded areas produces illusions that the brain interprets as presences. I had an explanation and I applied it to myself. That night, while reading by the fireplace, I heard knocks at the door. They were not urgent knocks or from someone needing help. They were 3 slow, spaced knocks, with the deliberate cadence of someone who knows you are going to hear them and is in no hurry. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. I stayed still for a moment, listening. There were no more knocks. I got up, took the flashlight, and opened the door. The porch of the cabin was empty, the dark forest beyond the light spilling out from the open door. The cold of the night rushed in, with that smell of pine and dampness that the mountain forest has after the sun goes down. There was no one. I checked the perimeter of the cabin with the flashlight. Nothing. I closed the door and returned to the chair by the fireplace. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day I went down to the nearest town, which was a 40-minute walk away, to buy some things I needed. The town was small, with a store that also served as a hardware store and an informal information point for everything happening in the area. The man who ran the store was named Don Aurelio. He was older, with that build of someone who has spent their whole life at high altitude, and had the calmness of someone who doesn't need to fill silences with words. While I was paying for what I had bought, I mentioned almost in passing that I had seen a boy in the woods near the cabin. Don Aurelio stopped counting the change. He looked at me. "What was the boy like?" he asked. I described what I had seen, his height, the dark clothing, the way he stood still looking at me. Don Aurelio finished counting the change and placed it on the counter. "And did he knock on your door?" he said. I stood still. "How do you know that?" "Because he always knocks," said Don Aurelio. "It's what he does." "Who is he?" Don Aurelio leaned on the counter with his arms crossed and looked at me with the patience of someone who has had this conversation before and knows that the person on the other side is not going to fully understand but deserves to know. "Here they call him the boy of the forest," he said. "He has been here longer than any of us who live now. The old folks from when I was young already knew him, and so did their parents. No one knows exactly what he is. Some say he is the spirit of a child who died in the forest long ago. Others say he was never a child, that he only takes that form because it is the one that works best to get close." "Get close for what?" Don Aurelio looked at me directly. "To enter," he said. "Enter the cabin?" "Wherever you are," he said. "The cabin, the house, whatever. But first he knocks. He always knocks." "And what if someone opens the door?" Don Aurelio uncrossed his arms. "No one who has fully opened the door has been able to explain to me well what happened next," he said. "There are 2 or 3 people in the village who say they did it, and none of them talk much about it. What I do notice is that since they did it, they are different people from what they were before." "Different how?" "More subdued," he said. "As if something in them had gone away and not come back." I returned to the cabin with that conversation in my head and with a discomfort that I tried to analyze with the objectivity of the doctor I am. What Don Aurelio described was local folklore, the kind of story that small towns build around experiences that cannot be explained any other way. The child I had seen in the forest could be anything: the shadows between the trees, the fatigue, the mind that has been under pressure for months and that, in rest, begins to process everything accumulated in ways that seem external but are internal. I convinced myself reasonably well. Until that night. The knocks came at 11:40. 3 knocks. The same cadence as the night before. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. This time I did not get up immediately. I stayed sitting on the bed in the dark, listening. There was silence, and then a voice. It was the voice of a child, high-pitched, clear, completely inappropriate for the time and place. It came from the other side of the door, from the porch. "Sir," said the voice. "Sir, I am cold." I remained absolutely still. The voice had something that did not correspond to what it was saying. The words were simple. The request was that of any child lost in the cold. But the tone was flat, lacking the urgency that a child who is truly cold and afraid in the woods at night would have. It was the tone of someone reciting a learned phrase who knows what the right words are but does not exactly know how they feel. "Sir," the voice repeated. "Let me in." I did not respond. The silence that followed was long. Then I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, circling the cabin along the outside wall. I kept tracking the sound. The front porch, the right side wall, the back wall, the left side wall, the front porch again. It stopped in front of the door again. "Sir," said the voice, "I know you are awake." It was right, obviously, but the fact that he said it, that he chose to say it, gave me a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I got out of bed carefully, without turning on any lights. I walked to the side window, the one that faced the side of the cabin, and barely moved the curtain. Outside, in the darkness illuminated only by the moon, there was a figure standing next to the wall. It was the silhouette of a child. He was facing the wall, with his palms pressed against the wood, and his head turned in my direction. He was looking at me even though I had barely moved the curtain. I stepped away from the window. I sat in the center of the bed, with the flashlight on, and thought about what Don Aurelio had told me, about the people who had opened the door, about how they were now. The voice did not return that night, the footsteps neither. But at 3 in the morning, when I had already decided that I was not going to sleep anymore and was sitting by the fireplace with the fire turned up to the maximum, I heard something different. No knocks, no voice, just a breath. It was coming from under the door, the kind of sound made by a person lying on the floor with their face against the threshold. A slow and regular breath, too regular, without the variations that the breath of something alive has. I stayed looking at the crack under the door. Under that crack, very faintly, there was a shadow that moved slightly, as if something was there, on the other side, just inches from the wood. I didn't move. The breathing continued for what I estimated to be 20 minutes, although it could have been more. Then it stopped. The shadow under the crack disappeared. The forest fell into complete silence. At dawn, before it finished getting light, I packed my things, closed the cabin, and set off for the village. I didn't stay for breakfast. I didn't take inventory of what was left to leave it organized as I had promised my colleague. I simply left. I passed by Don Aurelio's store. He saw me enter with my backpack and my face of not having slept and didn't say anything right away. He served me a coffee without me asking for it. "How many nights?" he asked. "2," I said. He nodded. "Did she open the door?" "No." Something in his expression relaxed slightly. "Good," he said. "When she doesn't open the door, she loses interest after a while. She looks for someone who will. And is there always someone who does?" Don Aurelio looked at me over his coffee cup. "Always," he said. "There are people who are curious, people who don't believe, people who think they can handle it. There's always someone." I took the coffee, thanked him, and continued on to the city. I got home that same day. I took a shower, ate something, and slept for 12 straight hours. That night I didn't dream of anything. But at 11:40 exactly, I woke up. Not because of any sound, not because someone knocked on my door. I woke up alone, in the silence of my apartment in the city, with my heart racing for no apparent reason. I stayed still listening. My apartment was silent. The street outside had the normal noise of the city at night. There was nothing. I closed my eyes, and on the edge of sleep, very softly, almost inaudible, I heard 3 knocks. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. Coming from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. I didn't open any door, but since that night, every time it's 11:40 I wake up, and I stay still in the dark until it passes. I don't know how much longer it's going to keep happening. That's all I can say. And there ends Daniel's testimony. He wrote to me at the end that he still sleeps with the hallway light on, something he hadn't done since he was a child. I don't judge him at all. If you've ever heard something at night that you shouldn't have heard, or if you've visited a place where the local warnings turned out to make more sense than they seemed, tell me in the comments. I'm interested in reading it. And if this story accompanied you tonight, subscribe to keep receiving more every week. Take care. We'll hear from you in the next story.